Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to thank you for accepting the challenge and joining us on the journey of looking at deprivation challenges to explore how the disruption creates a path for opportunity. We will take a closer look at challenges like dryuary and show how a deep focus on behavior opens up new opportunities for food and beverage companies. I'm Kim Lozano with Marge Wrigley, part of the Global Sensory team, and I'm here with Kristen Dale from Insights Now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Dale with Insights Now, and in my role as a client partner at Insights Now, I have the great pleasure of working with amazing people like Kim Lozano. We do work together to build strategic research plans, develop customized training programs and workshops, and collaborate in ways to identify what solutions will align to create a path to answer the business problems they're trying to solve. And I'm surrounded by a brilliant research team to execute those plans. And I'm thrilled to be here today with Kim to talk about disruption and its opportunities. But first, we have a couple of housekeeping items to really talk about a little quickly here. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation, don't be shy, send them in using the box to the right. And if you're having any technical issues, I'm not the person to help out with that. But we do have our teammate Shelly on the line with us, and she'll be happy to help you with any of those tech issues. We are recording the session today, so a copy of the webinar will be available in a few days. So do be on the lookout for that, and let any of your coworkers know who may not be able to attend the session today. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Pardon me. I'm going to go off camera for a moment. Okay, before we dive in, we invite you to respond to the following challenges. And I'm going to open a poll for us. Would you rather be able to taste colors or see smells? Get a paper cut every time you turn a page or bite your tongue every time you eat? And then talk about deprivation. Live in a world with no mac and cheese or a world with no pizza. Go ahead and answer those if you would. Thanks again for participating. We'll take a look at the results a little later, and now I will turn it over to Kim to kick us off.
Thanks, Kristen. So I'm sure we can all agree that the past 2.5 years were quite challenging. So why then are we still talking about challenges with you? Well, the idea of giving up something isn't new if you think about New Year's resolutions or Lent as examples, but it seems we hear more about these types of challenges in recent years. Some are wellness-minded like dryuary, and some are more of a distraction like the cinnamon challenge. With the help of social media, these self-imposed challenges have a bit of a social aspect, a visibility, and a camaraderie that adds an element of accountability that we might not otherwise have, perhaps helping us to be more successful in our quest in these challenges. Mindful disruption, we think about scaling back, adopting a moderation approach. This lends itself to allow us to live more fully in the moment by bringing awareness to behaviors and decisions made for those new or compensating behaviors. These emotionally driven approaches to coping, combined with how moments are changing, can lead to new opportunities for brands and innovators. And we believe these types of challenges are a bigger opportunity for return on investment than what we may have originally thought.
So how do we find these self-deprivation activities? Well, first, we do it to ourselves, right? That these are voluntary. We deny ourselves our own interests or desires. So we can really look at them in two different ways. One is the deprivation a short-term disruption? If so, then we can bucket it as a challenge, which is a short-lived or no permanent effect desired, or really even expected. Or we can ask the question, is it a long-term disruption? If so, then we bucket it as a resolution. The intent here is to have a long-term effect for a desired behavioral outcome. We'll take a look at two different challenges. One is Dryuary and the other is Lent. And for those of you not familiar with Dryuary, that's a short-term deprivation of alcohol in the month of January. Sounds kind of crazy, right? The idea behind this challenge is to give a fresh start coming out of the indulgences of the holidays. It's not necessarily a New Year's resolution, but it's more of a jump start to the year. The idea has really become a growing trend, and it's one that can become social. And when we did our survey, we did find that of all the people that we surveyed, it was really 25% of that population that fell into this group. So you can see it's becoming definitely more mainstream, but I, for one, have not gotten behind this trend. And then for those of you not familiar with Lent, Lent is a slightly longer self-deprivation journey. And this one has an actual religious root to it. It has an intentional or personally designed deprivation journey. And this particular challenge, along with Dryuary, they're not meant necessarily to be a permanent alteration, but again, a momentary pause on the consumption of something or a change in behavior. And then, of course, we all know about New Year's resolutions, right? You begrudgingly do them, and it just becomes part of our ritual every year. They tend to be more varied, but they're not always centered around deprivation, but they are meant to be a long-term journey, and they are conducted with a desire for some permanent behavior adjustment, whether that's adopting, replacing, or removing. So really, what does the self-deprivation journey look like? Well, it starts with a self-imposed disruption. And then during that journey, the behavior of the participant often changes. And whether intentional or not, they use compensating behaviors to close the gap of what they gave up as part of that disruption. So is willpower simply enough to change that mindset? We're going to take a closer look at the decisions to embark on these challenges, the coping mechanisms, and then as innovators, figure out how we can utilize those insights to create opportunities for the integration of products, whether that be current or new, and then activate those insights by making product messaging relevant. And as advertised, a lot of the discussion will be centered around the Health Improvement Challenge Dryuary. So let's dig a little deeper into disruption.
So let's start with what exactly is a disruption? It's a disturbance or problems which interrupt an event, activity, or process. But it can also be a radical change to an existing industry or market due to technological innovation. So we wanted to pause here a moment to take a look at what happens when a routine is disrupted. I've got an example of two different brands creating disruption. One creates a disruption, one took advantage of a disruption. So if you look at Keurig, this is pre-pandemic, so it goes back a few years now. But when it was introduced, it disrupted how consumers thought about their home or office coffee brewing routines. They can have that afternoon coffee without, I don't have to hesitate. I don't have to think about, do I want to waste a whole pot? I can make myself a cup. I can make a cup for my coworker or whoever I'm home with. And we can even tailor that. It can be a particular flavor that we want. So it really opened the door to the consumers rethinking how they consume their coffee. And then there is Peloton during the pandemic. It was in the right place at the right time. You can't go to your gym any longer. Well, let us come to you. We have the perfect solution. And both of these brands have opened the door for many copycats.
So Keurig and Peloton are great examples where products created the disruption in the market to open opportunities. But here we are seizing on the disruption the challenges create to open opportunities for our products. So to understand the potential opportunities this creates, we need to take a step back to see how these participants actually arrived at the challenge. Really, what were their motivations? How did they get involved in the first place? So as you can imagine, there were many paths into these challenges. Drivers are wide-ranging from COVID immunity concerns, which I'm actually dealing with right now, to losing weight, to a reset and actually taking back control over one's life. That usually happens after we indulge a lot over the last few months coming into the end of the year. Many of the motivations we found were similar, so we were able to segment them into 4 driver types. First, we had self-focus, and this was our biggest cluster. This was inward and directed at very personal goals that were not health related. The next bucket we had was wellness. This was inward focused as well, but this was very specific to personal health and overall betterment. Then we had a social segment. This was shared experience, and this was an outward focus. And then we had a curiosity segment, and this was just a group of people who really wanted to see what the hype was all about. They heard about it from their friends, they saw it on TikTok, they heard about it from their coworkers. So what we see here, regardless of whether it was Dryuary or, and even in some cases of Lent, when it comes right down to it, the greatest drivers are actually pretty simple. It was looking inward. So the opportunity is to talk about the need for self-reflection and betterment with these self-deprivation challenges. So yes, it takes more than willpower. Entering these challenges, people focus time and energy on different ways to alleviate pain associated with this disruption, taking many forms from yoga to journaling, snacking, and binge watching, as you can imagine. So coping in Dryuary isn't all mocktails. Why do we see such variety in coping? Well, what we found is the moment they use their give up changes. So the coping mechanism selected in the moment must change as well. We were able to actually segment all of the different coping mechanisms, just like we were able to segment their motivations. The coping mechanisms took shape as either distracting from the moment or leaning into the moment. And under the distract umbrella, we see a literal distract me cluster. And this was activities based with the focus on shifting thoughts away from the give up in order to distract. And then we have a distract through soothe senses. This is also a distraction cluster, but through comfort with a focus on fulfilling sensorial needs of what that give up provided. So both of these clusters move away from that something and toward a new moment of the something. On the other end, we see people who take an inward approach to provide comfort in that moment. So they were really leaning into the moment itself. So they were just trying to center themselves. We have a mindful cluster. They were getting more grounded and just being present in that moment. And the other cluster was more emotional. They just did more self-expression. They were identifying their feelings and just getting more in tune with themselves and being present. So as innovators, understanding the context of the solve, how they actually coped, that will help us align our portfolio to the new relevant moments. So here's where we can look for the opportunities. Get on the list.
So let's do a little deeper dive into coping and the difficulty of the challenge. Perception of difficulty is similar across the types that we explored, but it's not an indicator of whether they will cheat or not. It's also not correlated with a successful completion. Cheat days, we find, become a form of coping. So if a person is satisfied with their replacements, they're less likely to cheat. However, if they're not satisfied, they haven't found that right replacement, they're more likely to cheat because they're not satisfied. They're still in that seeking mode to find out what is going to work for me. The duration of the time that they stayed in the challenge also didn't matter. They still had satisfaction with their replacement. However, when a challenge is a resolution, a longer duration, the more permission people give themselves to move in and out of the challenge, which translates to more cheat days. So as you can guess, there were many more in New Year's resolution versus Dryuary. Interestingly, of the people that participated in the survey, 96% of people who completed Dryuary reported that they did not cheat, and 86% of those were satisfied with the replacements that they found for the moments.
So as Kim mentioned, we didn't see difficulty in the challenge itself as an obstacle to satisfaction, but we were still curious, could they still be missing something within that journey? So we looked at what the Dryuary participants might be missing in the journey without the alcohol. An interesting finding is that it appears to be more about the desire for a relaxing or a social moment and less about the alcohol. Falling to the bottom was the actual libation. That is what they reported, that they really didn't miss the alcohol, they missed the moments. So the important takeaway is that they're seeking the moments the alcohol connects to. And this correlates to the coping mechanisms, right? What we saw there, it wasn't a one-to-one replacement of that give up, but it was rather recreating the moment that they used their give up. So to be successful, your product really needs to deliver that moment.
So knowing more about coping mechanisms, cheat days, and pain points, we asked participants if some alternative solutions or products could make the challenge experience less difficult and even more enjoyable, and what ultimately that product would need to deliver. So the seeking mode that they were aligned to closely is the need to be distracted. They're telling us what solves must deliver. The ideal replacement provides relaxation, it distracts the mind, it keeps me inspired, and it's also entertaining. This is directly in line with the segments of coping that we have already discussed. So we also explored if there were other types of permission they gave themselves to provide some of that relief that they're seeking. And as you can see, all bets are off. They're saying that they will make trade-offs during the disruption, which we think is great news as it opens the door for putting a new perspective on sometimes taboo foods.
And that's great news if they're bringing in taboo foods and they're adjusting to their new coping mechanisms. So the solves for the disruption of the challenge can actually become routine. And what we talked about early on, right, with challenges is that they're not typically centered around creating a lasting effect of the newly disrupted routine. Here, we do see there's an opportunity to change behavior for the long term with the deprivation challenges. Regardless of the drivers of the challenge, if the coping mechanism used to solve the pain point works, then there's a greater chance for integration long term. Because we did see that 86% of these Dryweary challenge participants said they would actually adopt a new lifestyle and use their alternative activities, food, beverage choices, or incorporate those alternatives into their routine. So if your product can meet the moment, it can actually lead to product long-term integration. So make it emotional. In the journey, we were interested to see if emotions at decision time and post-completion, whatever that looked like to the participant, would impact the journey. And why is that important to us? Well, because we know products are really only successful when they can trigger the specific intended emotion. We know that understanding emotions elicited by specific sensorial experiences improve product design, and it ensures that the product actually can deliver a custom fit. And we know that our customers love nothing more than the belief that a product was designed for them. So why is that important to us as innovators, right? We can use these emotional insights to connect products better or innovate for the challenge journey. So here, we can see the percent of people who experience that specific emotion implicitly. And as we expected for all challenge participants, really no matter that challenge type, at the onset, there was a high implicit connection to being hopeful, calm, excited, and satisfied. And if you think about any time you've participated in a challenge, whether that be a Dryweary, if you've participated in that, or a 5K, or you've done the Whole30 diet, something like that, you've definitely had a perspective of you're excited about it, right? You do have a perspective of you want it to be successful, and you do have a sense of confidence that you're going into it with a positive attitude. So we do see people are excited and hopeful at the beginning. And for Dryweary, we did see just as many people were hopeful at the start as they were at the end. However, 3 months into New Year's resolutions, 17% had already lost hope and 16% were less satisfied emotionally. With Dryweary, we also saw feelings of confidence, pride, and relief had increased post-completion. So we do know that shorter challenges have the ability to maintain positive emotions. And because the coping mechanisms were successful in the short-term deprivation challenge, it had a positive impact on the emotional state of the participant.
So let's dig a little deeper into those emotions. With the short challenge of Dryweary, most people did maintain their emotions through the challenge. Because there was a quick finish, we see people feeling proud of their accomplishments at the end, even if they didn't finish it perfectly. And the peacock here at the end, they felt empowered and on top of my doubts. I have the ability to take on anything. And then Lent, and when we did this survey, we were about halfway through Lent. So this is a slightly longer challenge, roughly 40 days, less structured. But we see, as Kristen indicated, we see the same hope at the beginning, but then halfway through, some people are starting to feel like they're less committed. It is more of a challenge. They still have hope, but yet they're kind of crawling along. And then finally, with New Year's resolutions, which I personally, I don't know the last time I actually stuck to my New Year's resolution. We get that same type of hope, at the beginning. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of anticipation. I'm going to do it this year. But 3 months in, they're now unenthused, losing hope and concentration. And I liked this quote from one of the participants. I felt it was a very powerful explanation of how many are feeling as they realize the struggles of making these real life challenges. I feel like I'm underwater. I'm on a path looking for success, but unsure of how and where to look for it. Fear that I may fail at the things that I need the most, suffocating because some days I feel non-existent. That sounds so desperate to me.
It's a very sad state of affairs. Yeah. So I guess don't be so dramatic, right? I guess be emotional. So what we're trying to say here is the opportunity lies in how to message your product or brand by reinforcing those positive emotions to support success. Focus on the emotional job to be done. We're always talking about the job to be done. Let's take a look at that from the emotional perspective. Provide the satisfaction and confidence. So when positioning your product into the challenge moments, focus on that satisfaction and confidence as a message there. And to adopt your product and change the routine, don't lose that love and feeling. So in essence, the product they select or the solve needs to keep them in that same emotional state, start to finish, or actually improve upon it, right? And then finally, we want to make it rewarding. We did ask these participants, did you reward yourself for completing the challenge, or depending on that particular challenge for what they had completed, right? Since like Lent, they were kind of halfway through, and same thing with New Year's resolution. And for Dryuary, we really expected the reward would overwhelmingly be going back to alcohol. And for one particular person, he said, thanks for asking. As a reward, I spent the whole weekend at the bar drinking with friends. But for the most part, what we found was that they did not indicate, in fact, that it was just going to be a spur of the moment reward where they just decided to go and have their craft beer or go out, on the town with friends and have some wine or just get some drinks. They actually planned a reward for the end of their journey. And the top 3 rewards were bucketed as self-love. They were really looking to have a newfound confidence in themselves. They were looking for a better state of mind. They were looking to feel better and have just a sense of self-worth and satisfaction that they could actually finish and have a sense of accomplishment coming out of that journey. So they were looking forward to that. Many other people focused on planning a food indulgence. You can see here, somebody gave themselves a Big Mac with 45 grams of fat, but other people talked about going out for fancy meals. They were planning for something like that. And then we had a really big bucket of extravagance, people planning trips, planning to purchase technology, new laptops, new handbags. So what we found here is they actually took the time to make plans for that. And this was only a 30-day challenge. You have to recall that. And then falling to the bottom was alcohol. So knowing the reward is planned and what types of rewards are chosen more frequently, that opens another path of opportunity for companies to actually create anticipation with your product as the reward in these deprivation challenges. So you can stand at the finish line with your medals in hand.
So the opportunity, we think, is all about perspective. Instead of talking about intermittent fasting, should we be talking about intermittent eating? I get to eat from noon until 10 p.m. That sounds much more positive than I have to give up food for X amount of hours a day. So we want to think a little bit differently here. Maybe it's not innovation, but perhaps communication. Take a look at your portfolios to see if any brands align with the motivations for deprivation challenges and how to communicate that they provide a pain point solve. Do we use a different perspective on our products? Can we approach the challenge with a seasonal mindset for product development or positioning? And what happens if we create our own deprivation challenge? Challenge consumers to go 30 days without caffeine or sugar or fast food. What might we message our products as the solve or reward in those instances? We look at new trends like veganuary and ask that same question. I had to look that up. That is going vegan for a month, like in January or February.
It's just in time for the Super Bowl. So you come out of the indulgence of the holidays, you remove alcohol from your system, you get a clean eating plan in place, and then you dive into the Super Bowl. I think that's what happened.
So based on this, we had some thoughts on key takeaways. And so the real pain points for these self-imposed deprivation challenges is not about giving up the product. As you saw, I gave up alcohol for January. And that's the last thing that I was looking for. When I was not on it, or what I went back to. It's really about what is that context? What is the job to be done? You need to find something that's going to help them replace that moment or the solve for the moment that they're in. It has to fit in that context. And people are disrupting themselves, and they are in seeking mode throughout the challenge. This is really a great opportunity, we think, for brands to have, to get into that consideration set. And again, it's how do you talk about your brands? How do you position your products to help them see that as to help solve for that moment and to get into that consideration set that they're looking for. And replacements are not singular, and they're not even necessarily consistent. So even if you're satisfied, you may still continue to try some other things. You may find things that work even better than something that you were, satisfied with. And so we feel like there's a lot of opportunities for products and brands to fit in that can potentially lead to some sort of an adoption into their regular routine long after the challenge is over, right? And so it's not necessarily a permanent, but you can, use that as a bit of a trial period and they can figure out how they're going to work your brand or product into their routine longer term. And then finally, they make allowances and partake in off-limit or limited food. So, thinking about, all bets are off. If you work in a category that is a little bit more indulgent or seen as a little bit taboo, how do you think about that? How do you reframe and change people's perspective to be more fitting in that moment that they're looking for something to satisfy them? So with that, the challenge is now yours, should you choose to accept it.
Thanks, Kim. So let's take a look at our poll here. Let's share these results. So let's see, would you rather be able to taste colors or see smells? Ooh, it's a tight one. Just by a hair, be able to taste colors. Would you rather get a paper cut every time you turn a page or bite your tongue every time you eat? Easily get a paper cut every time you turn a page. And I think that's because most of us read from a screen, right? So that was an easy one. And then here's the deprivation challenge of all. Would you rather live in a world with no mac and cheese or with no pizza? Hands down, everyone would choose no mac and cheese because it seems like we all cannot live without pizza. So with that, thank you all very much for participating today. We hope you found it as enjoyable as we did doing all of the research, and we can now open it up to questions.
I do not see any questions in the chat box.
Nope,
yet.
not yet. We have one. Any examples of a product you think did well in supporting deprivation?
We we collected a little bit of that information, but off the top of my head, Kristen, I don't remember what was rising to the top.
No, I think when we take a look at it, the taboo foods was a little surprising to me. So I think there was a lot of hits on taboo foods. I think that ended up in the category of where people found support in the deprivation.
It could be some of those taboo foods are probably things that they had growing up or things that they really, really like, right, in regular times, and they feel comfortable going to that.
Sure, and it could also be a social aspect to it as well. So if you're giving up alcohol and dry-uary, it's a social aspect for you, right? And that provided the entertainment. Oftentimes, some of those taboo foods, pizza and comfort foods, you're doing that in a social setting. So there could be something to that as well. So a very good question. If you were an alcohol brand, how could you leverage dry-uary to boost sales? That's another great question. I think what you want to do is really look at the moment here. So what we discovered is, I think we went into this thinking it's going to be products that are about mocktails. And we thought the outcome would be, we're going to look at products that have to deliver on a mocktail experience. So it's going to be confections that have a daiquiri, right, flair, or an old fashioned flair, or it's craft beer flair. And I'm not sure that's it. I think it's recreating the moment that they're looking for the alcohol to connect to. So you're not necessarily bringing a new product to them, right? So that's not something you're going to be able to replace, because they're not looking to replace it necessarily. That's not going to answer your question for an alcohol brand.
But it could go back to the
Kim.
conversation around messaging, right? And
Right.
thinking about the reward. It may not be top of their mind, that, to reward themselves. But if you think about messaging and how you can make yourself kind of fit into that moment, then that could be potential.
Sure. So what are some things brands can do to make emotional connections with their customers, especially when they're going through disruptions or challenges? How can they do this without feeling inauthentic?
So I think that probably that's a great build on that question, is how do you do it without feeling inauthentic? And I think it's really about creating empathy with your consumers. Recognize, kind of what they're going through, and let them know that you're there along with them for that journey. That you can help support them.
Yeah, I think there's more research to be done to really understand that, getting that empathy and taking that journey along with them, because it is different for all of those different types of challenges. Have a different experience for people, right? So if you can really get into that understanding, then you can come up with that storytelling and be able to have that authentic messaging for them. That's how you provide that authenticity, is really to have that empathetic journey with them. And then, do you see any trends in how frequently consumers are participating in these types of challenges? So when we did the survey, it looked to be about 25% of people had come in for dry-uary. So I feel like that's a pretty high number. That's starting to become mainstream to me. It seemed like it would be a smaller number when we were setting this out, I thought, oh, this is going to take us a while to actually complete, to find enough participants, because just doing research amongst friends and family, not a lot of people had heard of this. I think that's probably because I have a lot of friends and family that would never do something like this. But 25%, I feel like, was a pretty substantial number. So it is definitely catching on. And the more research Kim and I did, you did see a lot of people, especially in the craft beer world, it seemed to me, talking a lot about this type of a challenge.
And we saw when we first started this discussion, we saw there were newspaper articles and, and all kinds of published information on this, that we were really surprised at how much was out there.
Yeah. And I think if you're brave enough, you could probably start this challenge any time of the year. It might be a good one to kick off just before summer as well. So,
I know a couple of people that use it as a springboard. Like if I can get through the 30 days and then they extend it, like, I'll do it through Lent then. So it's kind of a springboard.
Yeah, definitely. But definitely lots of surprises to find out that it had really not a lot of connectivity to people needing to replace alcohol. I would have thought that would have been the number one thing, but it really was just more about that moment that they were using the alcohol in. So it was, the sports events that they were using the alcohol in, right? So they were watching their football games, they're watching their basketball games, and they had to use something else that connected to in that moment, or they were going out and socializing with friends. So they just were doing things differently in those moments. So very interesting findings. So thank you all for sharing. Any other questions that we can take care of for you? Oh, one more. Okay. Did you find there was a generational or gender difference in who was doing dryuary? That's a really good question too, Megan. I did not notice. It didn't seem to be skewed male or female. I can definitely go back and take a look, and I can send any new information over to you, but I don't know that anything jumped out, Kim.
I don't remember anything that we discussed specifically that surprised us, but I think it's good, maybe just a tad younger.
Probably.
But no gender split, which kind of surprised me, I think. Any other questions?
Great. Well, again, thank you all so much for participating and joining us. And hopefully it inspired you to go back and look at your products, your brands, your portfolio, and think of just new ways to maybe message. It's not innovation necessarily, but just a new way to bring your products into the hands of consumers. So again, thank you. Happy to answer any other questions. Certainly send those over to us at any other time. And again, take a look next week for the recorded video, and you can definitely let your coworkers know that this will be available as well. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.